Hello and welcome to my capstone presentation. I'm Alicia Foster with the UW program on the environment, and my capstone presentation is titled Sustainability and Solidarity, Linking the U.S. Environmental Movement with Global South Struggles. So for a bit of background, um, I have sort of background in environmental movement since as long as I could be in it. And as I've come to college, I've been involved in a lot of other activism, other political activism, from labor solidarity to international struggles. And I saw a lot of similarities between the two places they were linked. But I also saw some places where they didn't exactly line up, and it almost seemed that the environmental work seemed a little more constricted. So some examples of this that are even beyond like my scope, the Paris Climate Accords. They are a non-binding treaty, but on top of that, by their own calculations, they could not meet their goal of keeping the world within 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming, even if every single country completely complied with this non-binding agreement. And so there are other things like this too, where green transitions in the US will kind of focus on let's do more solar, let's do more electric vehicles. But it turns out that the mining that has to happen for this, for lithium, for the batteries, has very similar effects in global south countries to the mining or drilling for oil that these green technologies are supposed to replace. So things like that just kind of keep popping up. And apparently there's a word for this, which is the sustainability paradox, where if you're kind of not thinking of environmental issues in their full global political context, you'll kind of make these mistakes and not actually be able to solve environmental problems. And so this was really intriguing to me, and I wanted to explore it more with my capstone project. So I ended up working with a very cool group, grassroots organization, Capitan Alliance, on their Defend Lumad Struggles campaign. So Capitan Alliance and Defend Lumad Struggles are particularly looking at this sustainability paradox problem in the context of the Philippines. And the Philippines has it's basically a neo-colony of the United States. It used to be a United States colony. Technically, it's not anymore, but in practice, it kind of still is. So there are a lot of resources in the Philippines, natural resources, timber, rare metals, things like that. And US companies really have a grip on the resources there. They can extract them. There's a lot of exports out of the Philippines to global North nations such as the United States, which you kind of see illustrated here in this little illustrated uh, sort of comic looking thing that's big on this screen right now. And yeah, so Capitan Alliance, is on a campaign called Defend Lumad Struggles. Who are the Lumad? They are an indigenous group in the southern Philippines, which is really on the front line of this resource extraction that's kind of like illustrated here on this page. So their land has been really kind of attacked. They themselves have been attacked for resisting uh, the resource extraction that's been going on in their land and has really ramped up. And so the point of the Defend Lumad Struggles campaign is to raise awareness, raise support for what they're going through, how they're fighting back in places like the US where people maybe don't know about it. And so I was really interested in, how is this campaign communicating this like issue that has all these sort of like global geopolitical implications to an environmental audience who's like totally going to care about this resource extraction going on, but maybe doesn't have the context yet to fully understand why this is happening and therefore what strategies are most useful to combat it. And yeah, so that was kind of my research question, is how do you bridge that gap? How do you align the US environmental movements, who really care about these issues, but maybe don't see them yet as part of this like global political thing? How do you connect that to movements like in the Philippines, like with the Lumad, who can really like tell that this is more than an environmental struggle? It's a political struggle, it's a sovereignty struggle, it's like geopolitical economic struggle, it's all these things. And so I kind of had to split this into two distinct research questions. One, which I kind of labeled assessing enviro-political ideologies, but really just means how do people view stuff now? Where are people already at in the US environmental movement? And then the second research question, creating educational and motivational strategies, is kind of the counterpoint to that. Okay, if you know where everybody is right now, what they're thinking, how do you kind of get them over to where Kapatan Alliance and Defend Lumad Struggles is? How do you communicate this stuff to them in a way that sticks, in a way that like gets all the nuance and that makes them want to take action? So for the first research question, uh, how are people viewing stuff now? Uh, I split it again into sort of the background research and then my own application of it. So for my research, I found that there are kind of existing camps of US environmental groups. There's a lot of diversity in how they see these issues, what they see as the solutions, the best tactics, et cetera, et cetera. And some of them are kind of like closer to the Defend Lumad struggles analysis of these things than others because of their experiences. So some environmental groups or even individuals themselves kind of have this individualized perspective on environmental issues where it might be about like, people need to consume less plastic or, have less electricity use in their homes. And so what these people or these groups already have is kind of the like being really agitated about this issue, knowing about climate change, knowing about pollution, caring about these things, but maybe I'm not identifying yet that there's broader solutions than just individual consumption on a wide scale. Then you have kind of the anti-corporate groups, and these ones can definitely identify extractive industries as sort of a main antagonist. Uh, they might target like corporations like Shell or ExxonMobil or the fossil fuel companies. Uh, but they might not kind of connect it to how different governments are supporting those corporations by making it possible to extract from certain places and import to other places where that wealth can be accumulated. And then you have kind of the anti-racist or environmental justice groups. And they're really interesting because they already connect environmental and political struggles, but they do so in more of a local or US context rather than a global context. So they're seeing, from their own experience, okay, like this big uh this big power plant or polluting uh polluting facility has been sited on, our land and our community because we have like less political power and we can't fight against it. And so that is being able to like carry on the environmental harms. So they can see how the political power of certain groups or areas and environmental issues are linked in this way. So all they need is kind of the widening of perspective to say like this is not just going on in like your neighborhood, this is not just going on in your state, this is not just going on in your country, this is going on a like global inter country intergovernmental scale. And so uh as for the application, I also investigated local environmental groups in Seattle and kind of tried to figure out, okay, of these groups that are right around me, how do they kind of fit into these categories? Where are they all at? And then on the creating educational and motivational strategies, um, I wanted to first research, okay, how do you get this information across? What is both informational and motivational? What makes you like really understand these issues, but also want to act on them? And so I found a few things. One being the format that's best. And this is great for me because I love drawing. It turns out that drawing out these information, uh, doing like comic like panels, encourages people to interact with the information and make their own connections, uh, as opposed to just kind of like big walls of text, which is kind of why I have done all of these illustrations in my own capstone presentation here. And then as for the message, it turns out a big thing about motivation is feeling like your goals are achievable. And, that makes total sense. You wouldn't be very motivated to do something if you didn't think you were going to succeed. It turns out that there is a lot of sort of like uh, doom and gloom mindsets when you're trapped in the sustainability paradox. If you've just learned that the Paris Accords just aren't going to work, you might feel really bad about like trying to fight for environmental things. Uh, so it takes kind of like popping that sustainability paradox bubble and saying, actually, if you work outside of this system, these goals are attainable, and sort of showing people that and reinvigorating people to think that, yeah, you can actually do something about this. And then the way to show that, the narrative, is to kind of show characters who are exercising agency, somebody for the audience or viewer to project on and think, oh, wait, if they could do this, maybe I could do it too. Kind of like modeling the path that you want to take, making those connections. And so, given all this, I wanted to try and synthesize all these things together. So I took the knowledge that I have of these Seattle groups, took the knowledge that I have of the Lumad struggle, took the knowledge that I had just got about, how to make these motivational comics, and then tried to basically put them all together. And this was my resulting deliverable, the thing that I was giving to Capitan Alliance, is these illustrations. And they are based on the research that I've done, but also my sort of local uh, activist context. So this, the part in color here, is sort of a poster that I made to illustrate specifically. This is just one of the things that I made, but I think it's a good example. It's connecting kind of like the urban gardening movement in the US with the Lumad struggle in the Philippines. And it's doing so by way of illustration. So, some elements that you can see in there that are kind of like directly pulled from the research that I did. We have educational references to the extractive system of global capitalism and explicit calls to challenge it. So, not kind of like hiding that, but really explicitly saying that, like, oh, this is the thing that we need to go and challenge if we want this stuff to work. Uh, and so the way that I did that in here is showing a banana plantation that there's a lot of those in the Philippines, and they are encroaching on this indigenous land, and then showing the path that that takes to become a commodity in a United States grocery store. And so, using that as a link, I kind of showed how on both sides of the ocean, on both sides of this supply chain, people are challenging uh, this extractive system. So, on the Lumad side, that means defending their land. That means stopping the encroachment of these banana plantations, means claiming the land for themselves and doing their own subsistence farming. And then on the other side, on the US side, with these urban gardeners, it means sort of not buying food as commodities. Something that these groups often do is they'll do their gardening, they'll have their crops, and then they'll share them with people kind of like for free or for very low prices. And that's a way of saying, hey, we reject the sort of like consumerism that is based on the extraction from the global south. And so both of these are depictions of people exercising agency. These people are doing something to combat this system. And by showing the links between them, it kind of encourages people to say, oh, there are ways that I can be involved in or helpful to these struggles in the global south by doing my activism here, and kind of encourages them to think of, what could be more ways I could do that. And so my biggest takeaway is that this is a promising strategy for expanding the analyses of US environmental groups, is to take their own experiences, their own analysis, and then connect them to these like broader global issues using really creative and accessible formats that make them want to learn more, that make them like, kind of agitated, ready to go and fix this. But that's not all. Uh, that's not where this research stops, because the broader implication is how can this become a first step towards taking action? You've seen this thing, you've thought about it, you've really integrated it into how you're thinking about your issue. What do you go and do with that? And that's a question that it's gonna take all of us to answer. Uh, yeah, and then for my acknowledgments, kind of on that note, I want to acknowledge uh, Chad Book, who is, who was, who is uh, an environmental activist who was in the Philippines and was basically just a computer science student at a university there. And he learned about the Lumad struggle going on in the countryside in his own country. And he was really motivated to do something about it. And so he took the huge step of moving out there into the countryside and becoming a volunteer teacher for the Lumad to teach them math. As a volunteer teacher. And for his activism, for his support of the Lumad, he was murdered and tortured and murdered by uh, the armed forces of the Philippines, which are backed by the US military and continue to be so today. And so he was killed early 2002, and I heard about it the week afterwards. And that was what really got me involved in the struggle in the Philippines, and helped me learn about the Lumad, and eventually led me to taking up this capstone presentation, this capstone project. And so, yeah, I want to acknowledge him, honor him in some small way with this project, and hopefully what I do beyond it. Thank you.